お待たせいたしました。
Thank you very much for waiting, ladies and gentlemen. We shall be commencing the REI-sponsored International Symposium Revision 2019 on the Renewable Revolution. And this is the afternoon part of the program. To introduce the program for this afternoon. Session 2 will be about energy business turnaround, and Session 3 will be on era of 100% renewables. At Session 4, we'll be discussing the theme of for the creation of a carbon neutral world. So we ask you kindly to stay with us until the very end. We'd like to start Session 2. Those participants in Session 2, please proceed up to the stage. We'd now like to start the program, Session 2 on energy business turnaround. The session will be moderated by Head of Japan and Korea Research of Bloomberg NEF, Ms. Miho Kurosaki. The floor is yours, Ms. Kurosaki. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Miho Kurosaki from Bloomberg NEF. I have this heavy responsibility of serving as moderator on this very valuable opportunity. I thank the organizers, REI. I thank you for organizing this symposium and for your invitation. Energy business turnaround is the theme, and I will be moderating this panel discussion. And in doing so, I should like to give a brief presentation. It's a new format. And then we will have the four panelists give a brief presentation, and we'll move to have discussions after they have presented. So I ask for your kind cooperation. The turnaround, in talking about energy turnaround, we have to talk about the mobility transitions, otherwise we won't any progress. So let me talk about the relationship between energy and mobility transitions. Bloomberg NEF. It's a research institution. Some of you may have heard of the entity. Let me briefly introduce Bloomberg NEF. Within Bloomberg NEF, we are a research division. 250 are distributed throughout the world, and I work at the Tokyo office, and I'm head of the analytics department. Bloomberg NEF until last year was known by the name of a New Energy Finance. That was the name of the division. But recently we're dealing with not only energy, and it's not new and it's not finance. So energy and transportation, in addition to this, digital industries or commodities or advanced materials. And this year, sustainability is something new. Each of these sectors we try to connect in our analysis. So on mobility and energy, the turnaround, in discussing these issues, I'd like to refer to 3 points. I'm sorry, this is... I'm sorry, we do have the slides in Japanese. Twin transitions is what we call it. And then sector coupling. And I believe the origin of this expression is German, for both to evolve. And then the distracted boyfriend. On twin transitions, these two are not twins, but electricity and the automotive industry in the United States, if you think of these two industries as twins, on automotive EV, the penetration thereof is happening at a considerable speed. Last year, in a year, 2 million units, and to exceed the next 1 million, we're very close to exceeding the next 1 million. On the energy front, you have wind and solar. On the left-hand side, you see that last year, on a cumulative basis, we exceeded 1 terawatt. That was a record-breaking year. And then with that, the storage batteries, energy storage technology is also penetrating, and the speed at which this is occurring, of naturally renewable energy has penetrated. So energy storage technology is also developing at a great and fast speed on digitalization and decentralization. I'm sure Okamoto-san will be referring to this, the percentage of decentralizing. Whilst there are differences from country to country, the overall trend is on the increase. And so this trend of decentralization going forward will progress on digitalization. Japanese utilities, power utilities, and also on the right-hand side, you see the European or American businesses and the annualized planned investment capex, which is again on the increase. How are we doing on the decarbonization front? I've shown the situation in the United States. Decarbonization, power generation mix. The power industry is advanced, but other sectors are still yet to develop. With the power industry decarbonizing at a fast pace, if it has a positive impact on other sectors, I think that will be the opportunity afforded. Energy, and this is a mobility transformation. Different government entities are supporting and regulations are emerging. Respective states, respective countries are providing policy support. And with support, technology is advancing, and this is impacting penetration. On this graph, you see a solar module. The middle is wind turbines. On the right-hand side, lithium battery prices. We're seeing a straight downward reduction in numbers. And what this is contributing to is the reduced cost of technology. This is a graph from the United States. And what we call tipping point, what this is where solar and wind power and will become cheaper than coal and gas. And this is already happening in respective countries. And on mobility, EVs are still more expensive than ordinary automobiles if we take out the subsidies. But toward 2040, 2024, it'll become cheaper than ICEs. On the energy turnaround, it's happening at different speeds. The most obvious is cellular phones. When you noticed, it was already penetrating at a vast pace, and that's happening with regard to energy as well. So these two, how do they resonate with each other? Energy and mobility by 2040 they will account for half. So EV and renewable energy will account for a half. And if this is the case, there'll be more emissions from EVs, and both will produce a synergy. As for charging stations and infrastructure, for the energy industry, it is a positive. In what way this business model will work is something that our analysis has not shown. If you look at the respective regions, there are different players in this industry. And so the last point, in the middle, you have this gentleman who is the automotive industry, and he's holding hands with oil and gas. But then a newly emerged person or the power sector is something which is beginning to interest the automotive industry. And in the electricity industry, different players are coming onto the scene. This major turnaround is such that as a forward-looking acceleration, the oil industry people are entering into electricity, and they are already making inroads into the automotive industry as well. And so the power utilities, what strategies should they take? I'm sorry this is such a busy slide. If I try to explain this, it'll take me an hour, so I will dispense with that for today. Each utility is competing, and how to leverage EV is a business model which they are studying, and leveraging the charging infrastructure is something that they're studying as well. And likewise, the situation is likewise in Japan, although to a lesser degree. Electricity and mobility, the great turnaround. I've taken the example of mobility today. in the energy industry. There's a big transformation which is taking place, and the 4 panelists will be engaging in a panel discussion after this. What parts will be an opportunity for the energy industries, and what do we need to be mindful of? What do we need to learn, and can Japan take the lead? These are things we'd like to discuss. Thank you very much for your kind attention. First, we would like to have a presentation by Dorothée Fouquet. So you have the floor, Ms. Dorothée Fouquet.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure coming from Europe and giving just some thoughts about our wonderful energy union. And right up, I want to say that we have worked very hard. Many people, especially the European Commission, you will learn later from Mathieu more detail from the European Commission, the Parliament, the Council, and the outside world, which I'm representing in Brussels. I think we came a long way, and it was a very, very fabulous European exercise, a uniting exercise, to come up with a package full of new legislation and rules which mirror much better the progress in the energy system change in the Union. And, oh, sorry. Voilà. So we are proud to have gone this way. We are proud we have a new target, which will be for 2030, 32% renewable renewable energy in the overall consumption, and 32.5% efficiency target. The target, unfortunately, will be only a European-wide target, but we tried measures with the regulation to beef up responsibility of member states. But it's also very important, in my view, to look how far we are with the current target. The current target of 20% is a binding target distributed per member state. And here you see on that slide the share of energy from renewable sources according to Eurostat, our statistical public office. And what we see there is that many member states will not reach their target, most probably in time. And some got away with low ambitions, so they already reached their target. Then those countries, especially Sweden, became extremely progressive during the exercise, even though they had a little bit of a weak start. And we have the front runners, especially Denmark, always. Germany has not reached its target yet. So it is a classic front runner, and we hope it comes up again, and I think it will reach its targets not far away, but they have to do more. And then we have a lot of important member states who are lagging behind. I still include the United Kingdom, and that is a big obstacle to go forward to 2030. We have an ambition in the clean energy packet that we want to become, in my view, back in the front row in the world, and we want to have a resilient energy union with ambitious climate policy. And we foresee a fundamental transformation of the European energy system. We do have a lot of new transformating docking stations in our new package. We talk much more about things like storage, sector coupling, demand-side management, and especially interconnectivity between the national grids. We also talk a lot about more regional cooperation. And, but there are some prerequisites that we have systems which are coherent, also systems of support. If not, you can not really cooperate. And we need and we want to have more involvement of citizens. That I skip because you know that we can rely on the cheapest sources meanwhile. And what is very important in the new system in Europe, the energy communities and the energy citizen based on renewable energies will become the more and more important actors in in the Union. Some member states are already on their way. We have, member states have to set up enabling frameworks, including that also tenants, people who do not own their house, have the ability to lease PV installations and can directly benefit from the harvest. We have a basic right to self-generation, auto-consumption and storage, the right to sell electricity which is in excess from your home and from your company to the grid, and to get a market value at least for that, and not to feed in for free. For small things, we are exempt. We can still exempt small installations from paying, for example, grid fees and so forth. The benefits are clear and the benefits are already tangible. I might say that some of our member states had gone through harsh economic times, and it was exactly the energy cooperative models which helped poorer households and poorer companies also to have access to cheaper and renewable electricity. There is a study from Delft University which foresees that by 2050, people could produce 45% of the EU's overall electricity. And in that people, you have small and medium-sized companies, you have the cooperative, you have the households and public buildings. We have the first, as we heard today, power purchase agreements concluded, for example, in Germany for PV without any feed-in or any other support. And we heard already this morning from the Netherlands offshore wind project, which also is aiming at no support. We have stumble blocks remaining in the European Union. Nuclear and coal-fired power plants in the Union prevent rapid change. It's the national champion attitude. We have a design of many capacity mechanisms in Europe, which are also more helping the old coal and nuclear fleet of being afloat. And we have too many of these capacity markets which popped up and which got a very light hand in the decision by the European Union for state aid. And overall, I think we are very encouraged that we go faster than even the union package is now signaling. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dorte Fouquet. Mr. Peter Jurgensen, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I'm from a system operator in Denmark, the state-owned transmission system operator for electricity and gas, and my perspective on energy business turnaround is seen from this position. And I will see this in the context of today. Of course, I will see this in relation to the green transition that we are in now. And I will start with the first enabler for making this green transition efficient. And that is, in our view, the market opening and the unbundling of the sector, if it's done right. And I tried just to illustrate here. In the top, you have the traditional value chain or supply chain, where electricity goes one direction and the money goes the other direction. In a market, we have introduced some new roles and responsibilities. And here the first I want to mention is the balanced responsible party, because this is very important in an electricity market where you want to introduce competition on equal terms, that you appoint some entities responsible for the balance of the portfolio of trades and generation and consumption. They have a financial responsibility, not a physical responsibility, because at the bottom of this pyramid, you have the system operator. And we will always ensure the physical balance of the system. But the costs we incur for this physical balance will be paid by the balance responsible parties causing these imbalances. So it's very important to give the right incentives in this market so that all participants, they act in a way to support the goals of the country, but also to obtain efficiency. So the design of the market and the timing in the electricity market is very important to obtain this efficient integration of variable renewable energy. Here you can see the long-term financial market is where you can hedge days, weeks, months, years ahead. And then you have the trading day ahead, closing at noon day ahead, the spot market. Then you have an intraday market where you can trade up till 1 hour before operation. And then finally, you have the balancing market where we, the system operator, ensures the physical balance of the system. And to show you the turnover in these markets illustrates that the largest share of trade is done in the day-ahead markets. And this is the turnover in the Nordic market. And only less than 0.5% is in the balancing market, which shows that there are some strong incentives to be good in forecasting and balancing your portfolio, so that we only have to balance the last part. And this is with a large share of renewable energy in the system, that it is possible to design a market that really incentivizes the market participants on commercial terms to balance their system and have a very flexible behavior according to wind and PV in the system. The other aspect of this market is to have a large market area where you have a lot of markets that are coupled together with a strong transmission grid, so that you can balance your variable renewable energy in a larger area and have PV balancing with wind, because you don't have the wind at the same time in all regions, and then they can actually counterbalance each other. And when we talk about this international market, we often hear that, okay, you can't do this as an island and so on. But when you compare Denmark with, for instance, Japan, you have to look at the whole Nordic region. Yesterday, I found out that the number of inhabitants in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands is 126 million. And that's exactly the inhabitants in Japan. So you could do this within your regions. You can make this market work. We are even planning a cable to the UK now. And this is more than 700 kilometers. So the distance to Korea is far less than the distance to UK. So that's another option to connect to other countries. For the first 50% of wind energy in the Danish system, which we will have achieved in 2020. So that's actually the day after tomorrow when you talk about electricity systems. We had a number of tools to do this, and we call this the horizontal integration. It's the strong transmission grid and interconnectors, and it's the wholesale market over Europe. And this is the well-known roles and the rules for markets. We also now realize that this won't suffice for the next step toward 100% renewable energy. We have to open a new toolbox. And we haven't all these tools ready yet, but we have to prepare them. And they will mainly consist of the vertical integration, where we are trying to couple the sectors, all the energy sectors, from electricity to transportation, heating, and gas. And it's also the retail market, where we create flexibility in the demand side. So the next change of paradigm is now towards a fossil-free system with a vertical integration. And this is just to illustrate what I mean with coupling of sectors. Here you have an illustration of the sources of energy on the left-hand side, and then the use of energy on the right-hand side. And then you have the power system, the heating system, the system of biomass, the fossil gas, and the fossil oil. And this is a simulation of the Danish system by 2035, when the electricity heating systems will be fossil-free. And you see a strong link between the sectors where power to gas is one of the enablers. And we need this coupling because we can only feed the green electrons directly to the consumers around 50%. The rest has to go into other sectors and via other carriers. And here we talk about green molecules. Another challenge is also that the traditional value chain is challenged because we thought that we couldn't build green energy without subsidies. Today we can. The electricity can be stored. Electricity and gas consumers are active and flexible in the future. And we will have different products for different consumers. So we will see a real disruption of this value chain and many new business models, even behind the meter. And this is challenging the sector. This is my last slide, just to say that the system operator is there to create value between this hardware and software in the future. And I don't want to read this, but just say that we will no longer be planning the green transition, but we will be part of a green transition driven by markets and consumers on commercial terms. And then stress that the system operator is very important, independent system operator, to facilitate the market, the transmission grid, and enable all these technologies to be used in the system. Thank you.
Peter Jorgensen. Thank you very much. That was Mr. Peter Jorgensen speaking from the perspective of system operator. Next is Mr. Hiroshi Okamoto. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much. My name is Okamoto from TEPCO Power Grid. I'd like to talk about the present status here in Japan, or how we view ourselves in the future. Utility 3.0 is what we call it, and toward transformation to Utility 3.0. How do we change our thinking going forward? There are triggers that bring about this major transformation, and there are these 5 factors, as you see on the screen. Full deregulation has taken place with regard to power and gas. After 2020, power and gas unbundling will start, and digitalization, that's another major trend, the decentralization, decarbonization. And this is not unique to Japan, perhaps, but several countries, including Japan, are seeing a decreasing trend in population. So these major factors will change the energy industry, and that is what we think. As mentioned by Mr. Kurosaki, Edison and Henry Ford featured in her presentation. And Edison created Utility 1.0. That's the birth of the utility industry and rapid development. And after that, what Japan is facing at the moment, in the context of Europe, that would be about 20 years behind. But toward liberalization, there'll be unbundling and competition between power generation and retail. And we're about to face this. And a major change, other than this, there are other factors. Utility 3.0, the next model, is something that we have to head toward very soon. So if that's the case, what do we need to do? I've taken the example of digitalization. Digitalization is such that for one thing, it provides a user experience. Companies that sell goods are changing to companies that provide user experience. And this is what is being triggered. The power business, when Edison started it, or our predecessor, Tokyo Dento, when we started through lighting, we provided servicing. So per light bulb, we charged a certain fee. And we were a company that provided lighting. And then power came to be used for different things. So it was hard to measure the utility. And so meters were introduced. And so we sold by the kilowatt hour. And going forward, when digital transformation occurs, power kilowatt per hour will be a simple commodity. So a company that provides a user experience becomes necessary. So there's no experience, user experience of just consuming power. You use consume power to do something, or to do something you need power, to put it another way. So this power retail sales might be companies that provide services to the customers, or there may be those companies that sell power to companies that provide services, and there will have to be that major change. In terms of decentralization, Kurosaki-san has mentioned this to a great degree. So going forward, renewable energy-centered decentralized sources will be on the increase. And when this happens, when we try to decrease or reduce CO2, the transport sector, electrification advances, or heat generating process will be replaced by heat pumps. So energy consumption will decline going forward. The ultimate energy consumption will be such that there'll be a shift toward power. In the case of Japan, what happens? This power demand toward 2050, we've tried to plot it up until that point. Population is declining here in Japan, and the machines, equipment that use power have improved in terms of consumption efficiency. So power consumption is on the decline. In the transport and heat division, there'll be electrification. So this trend might be reversed. And then at the same time, decentralization will progress. And in terms of technology, storage batteries, for example, will be owned by the customers. And there'll be high performance storage batteries. And in the transport division, that will push electrification forward. These two will occur simultaneously, without a doubt. And when this occurs simultaneously, what happens? Firstly, sector coupling has been mentioned since previously. Decarbonization will lead to electrifying the society, and there's another part. The power source will be decarbonized. Both put together, if you multiply, you will see an advancement of decarbonization, and that's a bold forecast. In 2050, the ultimate energy consumption, within that, half of that will be electric, and then the final power consumption will be halved, will be reduced to 50%, and most probably CO2. To what degree we can decrease CO2 will depend on how we're able to decarbonize the power source. At the present point in time, non-carbon power source is about 20% of the total here in Japan. And if that goes to 60% or 65%, then CO2 derived from energy consumption will go to 70% or 75%. If power source decarbonization progresses further, 80% or excess in decarbonization in excess of 80% will become possible. The power system and the transportation system will become deeply connected going forward. This is a very conceptual diagram. The red dotted lines show the roads, the transportation network, and the blue are the power grid. And EVs have batteries on board, and they're moving on the roads. And depending on how you look at it, if there's a typhoon or a disaster, we go to transformer power stations with a power source where the customers will not find a power source. And so power source vehicles will drive all over the town. And if it's a truck, it's a big power source. But EVs carry electricity on the roads, and at the charging stations, it's connected to the grid, and power is received and transferred there. And we're doing a demonstration plant. There's a discharge, and the power grid congestion and road congestion. The EVs in the future will be automated. And so we can leverage this well, and we can solve all of these. And there'll be a surplus of renewable energy, and there's that challenge. And then EVs can be charged. And if the reverse occurs, discharge can be done. So the power system and transportation system electrification, by combining the two, it'll go a long way toward reducing CO2, and renewable energies, the natural variable resource can be leveraged to a great degree. I've exceeded my allotted time, so I'll go very quickly. If we do this, this light blue portion is the physical space, and there are different EVs and grids and physical things here. And then what brings this together, that's the cyberspace. And then you have a market and institution on top of that. In its totality, we have to try to optimize, and that's necessary. To go to my conclusions, there are 5 Ds, and with regard to heat and transportation, electrification will proceed. And if we try to do that, electricity and transportation or cross-sector attempts will be necessary, connection will be necessary, and the grid will become a platform that contributes to the transformation. And this is the basic thinking through which we provide our business services. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have gone I've overrun the time. Thank you very much for your talk, especially from the perspective of the grid.
Mr. Ruggiero Arricoldi, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start actually by thanking the Renewable Energy Institute for organizing such an inspiring and stimulated conference here in Japan. Here in Japan, where renewable energy still need to be concretely developed and promoted. Number 1, vision. Number 2, rules. And number 3, competition. Those are the 3 crucial and fundamental elements that need to be concretely developed if we want to concretely develop renewable energies. And this is what actually we are trying to do in Enel Green Power. Enel Green Power is the renewable division of Enel Group. And as you can see from our numbers, nowadays we happen to be the world's biggest renewable energy player, not only because of our installed capacity that we manage, which is a big number, also because of our geographical presence, because we touch the 5 continents, and also because we use all kinds of technologies. If you see briefly those numbers, out of the total of Enel installed capacity, which is almost 90 gigawatts, half of our portion comes from renewable energy. But this is something that we have been through years, actually, because we believed in our vision and in our intention of promoting renewable energy. So we drastically changed our culture internally and our vision in order to promote renewable energies. Obviously, we also are a distributor company. We also sell electricity. But what we are doing is that internally, we are the good guys, let's say, because we are green powerizing all our group, which means that actually that our business model is now part of the total business model of Enel Group. So all our company will need to adapt to our business model. And this is something that it took us, let's say, 10 years. But nowadays, we are convinced about our vision, and we will go on towards this direction. Also because we are present in so many different countries around the world. I mentioned briefly that we are present in all the 5 continents. And this gives us also a leverage on realizing the big picture. Because what we have to have clear in our mind is that it is important to have the big picture. Because nowadays, our industry goes extremely fast. Innovation and technology go extremely fast. Unfortunately, also climate change goes very fast. So we need to cope with the time where we are living. And this is what actually we're trying to do. You see that our geographical presence is very strong in the Americas, but the geographical market in which we are going to bet more in the next years will be Africa and will be Asia. Why? Because we realize that in those countries, there is a huge potential that needs to be somehow exploited. Every year we grow dramatically. This is just a briefly slide that mentions what we have done simply in the last year, from January to September. So we acquire new tender, we award the new tenders, we build up new power plants, we sign new PPAs with companies and with corporates, because our intention is to grow dramatically in terms of installed capacity over the years. And as we all know, actually, nowadays, we are a big supporter of international auctions, which means that according to our analysis, international auctions are the best solution to promote rapidly renewables around the world and to promote the competition I was mentioning to you before. Innovation and technology play an important role because nowadays we are capable of building new power plants in less than 3 years. If we think about this, 10 years ago, it was almost impossible to think that a solar power plant could have been built in less than 3 years. And also, the costs are reducing dramatically. Why? Because digitalization, which was mentioned before, plays also an important role. And we manage overall now more than 1,000 power plants around the world, which means that last year we had the record of producing 100 terawatt hours coming from renewable energies. You see this violet color around Japan because we're also present in Japan, thanks to one acquisition that we made in 2017, where we bought Enernoc, which is the world's largest, actually, demand side management player, demand response player, and we created this new division, which we called NLX, where we put all the new business. Mainly, obviously, e-mobility will be maybe one of our biggest bet in the near future, as it was mentioned before, but also we cover all other aspects of new business, including industry, cities, and home. And the acquisition that we made with Enernoc took us also here in Japan. Why? Because Enernoc had with Marubeni one joint venture, and actually nowadays we manage here in Japan almost 170 megawatt of demand response capacity. But also we are working around the world with NLX, as you can see, with many TSOs and with many countries, and overall we have in total almost 70 gigawatt of installed capacity that we manage around the world. Another important business that we're doing are corporate PPAs. Obviously, it was mentioned also by Adnan, the importance of the partners nowadays, big corporations, where with whom actually we're trying to sign PPAs. Last year, we signed almost 2 gigawatt of PPAs, mainly in commercial and industrial, but in total, we have almost 60 gigawatt of PPA signed, which is also an important number. Two important pillars of our strategy: innovation, I mentioned briefly, but sustainability is extremely important. What we are doing is that we are trying to align our business objectives with the environment and social needs in all the places where we operate. Actually, very often we reject projects simply because it doesn't match this alignment between business objectives and social and environment needs. And in the next year, we're going to grow again. Almost 11 billion euros, which means almost 11 gigawatt of installed capacity spread actually around the world, where Africa and Asia will play an important role. So to sum up, actually, what is extremely important is that a country, in order to promote concretely renewable energy, should have a proper regulatory, legislative, and policy framework, which was mentioned today many times, actually. So without having on one side one clear and on the other side one existing set of rules, it will be extremely difficult to set up renewable energy. So what we are trying to do is that we work very closely with institutional stakeholders around the world to explain them which is the best actually regulatory framework that a country should have in order to promote renewable energies. I began my experience in Enel 20 years ago, where actually the unbundling issue was on the table and that we solved 20 years ago. So 20 years later, coming here in Japan and hearing about this issue, it seems to me that something is missing. Normally, Italians, we are the ones that we are supposed to take time in doing things. But I suggest, and I really hope that also in Japan you can go very fast, because if you want to promote concretely renewable energy, you have to work a lot on policies. Actually, one important philosopher at the end of last century mentioned that you have to be the change you want to see in the future, because things don't change, but we do have to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruggiero Arico. We'd like to start with the panel discussion. I had some inspiration from Mr. Okamoto's presentation, the 5 Ds, the 5 changes, or 5 factors which bring about change. I'm sorry the print is very small. To these factors, the energy business is going to undergo great transformations. And what are the risks and opportunities? I tried to map that. I took the liberty of mapping that. And so we have these 4 outstanding panelists. The 5 factors in this. What is the opportunity for business? And these are things I'd like to ask. And since this is an opportunity, there are some kinds of benefits to the company, either to the company or to the industry. So these are things I'd like to ask the panelists. The last presentation was given by Ruggiero Arico from Enel. So I'd like to ask this to you. In your presentation, you talked about different factors which were included. And among the 5 Ds, you've mentioned in your presentation, in Japan, we talk about depopulation, a decrease of population at the outset. Africa and Asia has potential, you said. You very simply and nonchalantly put it this way. Where is the potential? Wherein lies the potential? Could you talk about that, please?
The fact that those countries are, especially Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, they are emerging countries, which means that they still have to develop many policies that in the past they simply didn't have. And also the fact that the enormous increase of population of those geographical areas will play an important role in this, because simply the demand will grow according to the demographic growth. Because very often we don't remember ourselves that since the population will grow dramatically, let's think the case about Africa. Africa will be the youngest continent of the future and the most populated continent in the future, which means that all this population will need to have access to electricity, access to jobs, access to infrastructure, and all those access should need to be sustainable. So this is why actually we play an important role, because we know actually which is again the best scenario, the best policies that those countries should have in order to succeed, in order to fulfill this need that obviously this population will have. But all the Ds somehow are important. I mentioned briefly maybe a few of them, but if we think about decarbonization, for instance, now we are all committed toward the SDGs, toward the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, even us as a company. For instance, in our case, we will be completely carbon neutral by 2050, which means a huge effort that obviously internally, externally we need to have. But also the regulation, also digitalization, as you mentioned in your slide actually, Miho, we are one of the first actually in terms of investment concretely that we are doing in digitalization. Because all those elements, all those Ds will actually improve and will cope, as I was mentioning before, with the time in which we are living.
ありがとうございます。レギュレーションに関してはちょっと後でまた話をさせていただきたいと思います。
Later on. I'd like to talk about regulation later on.
Mr. Okamoto, at TEPCO in Southeast Asia, you are engaged in a variety of activities. Of course, there are different options, but where do you observe opportunities? You have heard from Ruggiero Arico. So my impression is microgrid is one of your opportunities. Thank you for the question. It's difficult to choose just one, but both risks and opportunities are classified beautifully here. The risks and opportunities, they coexist. The largest risk and the largest opportunities come in pairs. So to say, out of this 5, if I have to choose decarbonization, decarbonize the community. Of course, partnerships are required in lots of meanings, but those in the energy business are responsible. Who else? If we do not play that role, we do not have the meaning of existence. That's the social value that we can provide. So we shall have to think about our management so that we become a benefit contribution to decarbonization. But the other 4 Ds are also important. Starting from decarbonization, And from different approaches, of course, we are going to be active both in Japan and in other countries, as Ms. Kurosaki mentioned. In the Philippines, for example, microgrid commercial project, it's micro, so it's not large, but there's an investment, and probably our technology might be useful. Microgrid, solar and diesel, so it could be a hybrid of the two, and how to manage. Access to energy for all would be the aim, and always the aspect of decarbonization must be incorporated. That must be in the calculation. And of course, in our global development, we do expect that there will be a source of growth for us. So taking the approach of decarbonization and providing access to energy for all, I think that's incumbent upon us, our mission, and at the same time, we do think it is our opportunity. Thank you. So out of the 5 Ds, rather than choosing only one, you would rather combine multiple elements. I think a combination of the multiple is the key. And if I may ask Mr. Ariko at Enel, you have the NLX business as well. And at BNEF, according to our survey, how to digitalize and what will be the positive impact of digitalization? What we know is, for example, by digitalization, demand-side management will be enabled, or there will be the OPEX might go down, and the drones can be used to check the operations of the wind farms. However, going forward, would this really be a positive benefit for the businesses? There are some skeptic observations. Any ideas? Is it really going to be positive?
It's extremely positive, actually, because thanks to digitalization, we reduce so many inefficiencies, which internally we have also because we are a giant company. So when you are a giant company, also we have enormous problem in terms of internal efficiency, in terms of many problems that we can cope only if actually we promote digitalization. Think about exactly the time by time, the control room, for instance. I mean, the books that we have, papers that we have, is huge amount of paper, of work that we can completely reduce thanks to digitalization. So that's why we're investing a lot, and that's why we created this new division called NLX, because intellectually this NLX will be like Enel Green Power was many years ago. A kind of a division where nobody wanted to work, where nobody believed in, but it was an important exercise that we done because we believed on that according to our vision, and then we succeeded. So what we're doing now with this NLX business is exactly the same. Nobody believes, we strongly believe, we will bet a lot, and obviously we will win.
とても刺激的な
Thank you for that stimulating, provocative comments and determination. May I ask Mr. Peter Jurgensen? We just spoke about digitalization. Mr. Ariko has explained their conviction. Data, digitalization. Naturally, from a system operator, you also agree about the importance. So what would be the positive aspect onto system operators by digitalization? One more question about this 5 Ds. The government policies or regulations, what might be the impact of policies onto 5 Ds?
First on digitalization, your first question. As I showed in one of my slides, we are at the end of the first part of the green transition with 50% wind power in the system, and we need a new toolbox for efficient integration of the next to reach the fossil-free system. And here we see digitalization as one of the main enablers, because a lot of processes on the retail market were not able before because of high transaction cost. But a lot of data-based business models can actually be implemented now, and there is a lot of smart guys out there finding new business models, acting as aggregators or with special services for the consumer, bundling products, and all this you can do with digitalization. You can bring down the transaction cost and you can make it work. So we see hope for a growing demand-side flexibility, so that we can have this flexibility for the system. The flexibility will be so important in the future. And then I would like to comment on the word deregulation, because I want to warn you, because market opening is not deregulation. If you think you can just deregulate everything, then you will have a market that doesn't work. You will have abuse of market power because of big market actors. They are dominant. And if you don't unbundle, and I mean ownership unbundling, or have a totally unbundled system operator, then you will have dominance from big players in the market, and you will have connection between grids and generator and trade. So it's not deregulation. You can open the market and have a set of market rules for the commercial part, but your grid and the system operation has to be regulated. And I'm sure our lawyer here will support me and say that regulation is maybe even more important with an open electricity market than before. So I warn against just think deregulation will create competition, because it won't. And then allow me, depopulation is not a problem in Denmark, but from the electricity side, we know that a blackout now and then could mitigate this problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. On the same point, Ms. Dorte Fouquet, earlier on, Dr. Dorte Fouquet, the community power decentralization is very much linked to this. And what, as has been commented now, regulation. In what way policy can support this trend? I'd like to put this question to you, please.
Policy has to lead energy system change, and that's what we have to realize. And I can only second Peter in saying you have another regulated, you have a market thanks to clever and precise regulation, which especially prevents discrimination on the market, and that is the only mean also to overcome and to help companies to get rid of what we always say, incumbent technologies, which do not help to reach sustainability and climate target. Because we are talking always about coal, but nuclear is the other big risk for societies, as we are here in the month of March, not without reason. So when I look at your Ds, there are a lot of other Ds which come up. Democratization is one thing. So what I said in my contribution, the customer is no longer a force-fed individual. The customer takes an active role. And it changes also the attitude of regulators. And it changes the attitude of legislation. I try to say that the European Union really, the first time, acknowledges it in many of its regulations and directives now, which we have since end of last year and beginning of this year. So when we have to be open, and often things are used as a mean in itself, like you said, digitalization or blockchain. As a lawyer, I work in blockchain, but it's just another tool. Legally, it's for stupid lawyers in a way. The underlying contract law is second semester. So sometimes there's a hype on one can hide behind those Ds, for example, or Es or whatever. So my appeal is also get your house in order when you start energy transformation. Make really where are we strong and where are we weak, and why are we weak there? What is hindering us? So if you have no interconnection flowing easily in your wonderful country, it's very difficult to start the debate of energy transformation. And yes, unbundling is the absolute must.
ありがとうございます。おそらく皆さん
Thank you so much. I've been listening to your comments. what do consumers want? What do they want? Being sensitive and responding to them and providing them with appropriate solutions. So offering solutions, that's about these 5 Ds or unbundling, as was mentioned before. Moving on to the next topic. Going forward, what Japan should do? What Japan should do? We welcome your contributions and comments, Peter. System operator independence was mentioned, and not holdings, but the complete unbundling. I think you mentioned that unfortunately here in Japan, we have neither. But in such a market, what should Japan do going forward? If you have any suggestions, I think that would be best. But if we don't address those things, what are the demerits that we would suffer from?
Well, I learned yesterday about the unbundling, the legal unbundling among the 9 utilities, and also about the position and the role of OCTO. And my suggestion would be that OCTO should develop. This is just the first step, but it should develop to an independent system operator operating the national grid for the whole country. And it should be empowered by the government to do this, to do the grid planning, telling the grid companies, the transmission companies, what to plan, what to build. And they should have the control center. They should have the responsibility for the balancing of the whole grid. And they should make all their decisions and business cases based on socio-economic welfare for the country and not for utilities. And it's easy to suggest for me because that's the way we have organized it in Denmark, but it works, and it's the only way that you can create competition on equal terms and make strong interconnectors between the different regions. As I showed you, we have this between the countries in Europe, and we are fortunate to have a strong commission from Brussels pushing the countries to develop interconnector and to develop one large electricity market. So that would be my simple advice. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you for your comments and advices. Personally, I was very encouraged 3 years ago because we sent out similar messages in our report by Bloomberg. Now the bill is there, but going forward, if Japan's situation continues, what would be possible? The system operator is not independent. What is the likely bottleneck, Peter, about your observation about the Japanese system?
It's actually the courage of the government, because this can only come from government.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Dr. Dorte Fuke, about the decentralization, the community, citizens' power you mentioned, going forward, if that could also be observed and advanced in Japan. I mean, for example, from the utilities perspective, the power demand on the grid might decline. But what is the area that Japan should work on going forward? I mean, I'm asking this because community, citizens, energy generation is starting in Japan like a corporatist and local community, if you can encourage the Japanese people.
You have already answered your question, I think. The cooperative model, as a lawyer in our firm, especially in Germany, we help setting up per week many cooperatives that are citizens around who want to do something, and they do it very concretely. So that's the one thing. But it has to be embedded. It is not a standalone exercise. It has to be embedded in, as you said, in a political, ambitious plan which goes beyond 4 years or 5 years of election periods. And what we need overall is also, you talked about the system operator and independent. You would also need an independent grid regulator that is very, very important. I always thought Germany has a very independent grid regulator, but the Commission is at the moment not happy, and we have a procedure before the European Court. Maybe you can look at that case, because it's interesting. And what you also need, coming from Germany, you need a clear phase-out plan for nuclear. And as you know, since some weeks, we also now have the start of a phase-out planning for coal, because that goes hand in hand. It's not that the cooperatives become a little zoo, that they can have 2%. And on your last thing on shrinking power demand in Europe, I don't see that, because you shift a lot with sector coupling, a lot of the transport becomes electrified. You may even need more electricity for all the gadgets we use for transformation.
ありがとうございます。私どもの
Thank you so much. According to analysis, about 12%, that's Germany, from electric vehicle. There will be a new demand in Germany. Thank you for your comments.
Lujero-san, you gave a presentation and a comment. You talked about SDGs and sustainability and the goals, decarbonization, what will feed into decarbonization, no doubt. I've talked to different persons. From the present status, to move to the sustainability goals, the middle process is difficult, a lot of people say. And I believe that you are proceeding at a very fast pace toward this goal. What are the milestones? In your presentation, you alluded to this somewhat. Could you discuss this in more detail, please?
The effort, first of all, I say that the effort is very important, because if you want to move to our target, which is, as I mentioned, to 2050, to be completely carbon neutralized, which means that we need to manage the phasing out of ordinary conventional power plants, which is an enormous problem in Italy, at least. So what we are doing is that, first of all, let's say we are working a lot on everything which is under the big chapter of circular economy, which actually we did not mention so far. Because under the chapter of circular economy, every single piece of this puzzle actually has a place. We are thinking about innovation, sustainability, about reconverting exactly the old and ugly power plants into something different, and managing and tracking everything we do. And this is a process which, first of all, we have to do internally. For instance, I don't know, we invented one internal economy circular procurement process, where we know exactly what we are doing in our procurement department. And this is something that we do everywhere, actually, within the company. And this is part of this work that goes towards reaching those SDGs. But then we have also the intellectual part, because intellectually, as I mentioned before, we need to be visionary, which means that we have to believe that what we are doing is absolutely what is needed nowadays. We are thinking about climate change, for instance. Renewable energy is one of the things that can tackle climate change. It's not obviously the solution. Yeah, please.
In your talk, you talked about conventional assets and phasing out the conventional assets. And there are skeptical views whether renewable energy alone will do the trick. Do you need storage batteries? Will that be sufficient, or maybe it's not? Could you comment on this, please?
Technology will help a lot. You mentioned storage. Storage, again, is something that we are really working closely. Why? Because we believe that also through storage we can solve this problem. So again, it's a question of big vision, big strategy, and to go towards this direction. So it is true that we have many people that are very reluctant in terms of phasing out the conventional sources, but for us it will be actually part of our main strategy. So we will do this way.
ありがとうございます。では岡本様。
Thank you so much, Mr. Okamoto. From your position, to the extent possible, for Japan, how Japan should lead, what kind of things should Japan learn, and how do you intend to go about in this market?
Thank you. Why this biggest difficult question at the very end? But thank you very much. I shall have to tell about what I learned. Deregulation in the 5Ds, but I think democratization should be in the 5Ds rather than deregulation. Democratization, decentralization, either way, whether it's technology, society, the decentralized, the dispersed technology, how to integrate. I think the direction integration converges. Uber, Airbnb, Mercari in Japan, the free market, that is where the digital technology is the key. Japan has high technology, but not exactly successful. Mercari is one of the free online market for consumers, the rare success case. In the world of energy, Japan does have technology. Then why not lead the world in creating a business model? For TEPCO alone, it might be difficult, but I think the Japanese society as a whole can do more, and we shall partner and collaborate with other partners. Lastly, what I thought was important, there was the discussion about regulatory framework by 2050 or by the end of this century to have a big vision, a big picture, and sharing that vision by all is important. In fact, I have wrote a book with a schematic diagram. I was wondering what might happen throughout this century. I am more invited to speeches, but nothing else has changed despite my book. I have to describe the concrete pathways to make people act. Just describing Envision 2050, I mean, as Ms. Klosaki mentioned, it was difficult to describe in the way of the books. But then people read and discuss and try to write, and eventually it could become a roadmap. So that kind of process, I think, Japan has to go through. And in fact, already in Europe, there are some solutions and answers that Japan can learn from. Going forward, for Japan, I think going through those thought processes will be important, and there's a great deal that we can learn from Europe. Thank you for all your insightful comments. There were many keywords today. 5 Ds, to convert them into opportunities. The consumers, the demand side are important, and the government needs courage. And a roadmap towards decarbonization was mentioned. 2019, 2020, we are in a very important juncture for this discussion. The big picture must be shared by the government and players in the energy world, that the roadmaps should be created together. There have been 4 excellent panelists. I would like to thank you for your very kind attention. My special thank you to all the panelists. Thank you very much.